This is good.
Okay, and like you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me when to start.
You're good.
Okay.
Start.
Okay. Hello everyone on the IG and Facebook. I'm Julia Bernal from Pueblo Action Alliance, and we have like our Pueblo Action Alliance crew here on Tewa territory. This is occupied Tewa territory, otherwise known as Santa Fe, New Mexico. This place holds a lot of history when it comes to the colonization of Pueblo and Dene and Apache indigenous people, the original peoples of this landscape. Every parcel of land, whether that's federal, state, tribal land, has always been ancestral, stolen lands of the original stewards of this area. And I'm here today with my relatives, with my brothers, to share some history and to teach the Bureau of Land Management why we're in such a climate crisis. So with the help of our friends at the Greater Chaco Coalition and Wild Earth Guardians, we were able to visually display a colonial history up until this point of fossil fuel extraction. We are here significantly on January 14th, which is the last federal land lease sale under the Trump administration, and we're here to demand that the new Biden administration respect the lands of New Mexico and discontinue and halt and ban any future federal leasing for oil and gas exploitation. Being that we're in New Mexico, this is a land that's rich of culture, but also rich in energy and other resources that have been exploited for capitalist gain over generations of time. And so today we're going to be going through this timeline as a way to re-teach the true history of colonialism and how the BLM, or the Bureau of Land Management, and other federal entities are upholding this system and this process of colonialism, and how it's displaced, disenfranchised, misused resources, and just really oppressed the indigenous people and other POC within this landscape. So when we talk about fossil fuel extraction, we mean that this is an example of the systems of colonialism. It's important that we make this connection of colonialism to the extractive industry because it is the story of the entire global indigenous struggle. This is the story across the globe, indigenous people protecting their lands from resource exploitation. It doesn't just happen here in New Mexico, it happens in the global south, it happens in Africa, and it's going to continue happening unless we address colonialism for what it is and how the generations have led us up to this point in time where we're still, as indigenous people, resisting colonialism and what it has done to our ancestors and what it is currently doing to our living cultures here in New Mexico. We see many indigenous relatives literally across Turtle Island and beyond, putting themselves in between developers, energy corporations, and federal governments like the Bureau of Land Management to protect the lands that they've been stewarding since creation. And so I want to bring us to this timeline up here, which celebrates pre-colonial history. How since creation, our ancestors have been stewarding areas like the Greater Chaco landscape. How we had developed certain architecture and design that met the needs of our people and met the needs of our communal lifestyle. And you see this happening throughout the 200s AD to 700 AD. And then we get to 850 AD, a time where Chaco was thriving. It was a World Trade Center. And our ancestors not only lived in this area, but they thrived in this area. And it's unfortunate that because of colonialism, they weren't ever given a chance to develop their technologies. They weren't ever given a chance to develop a system of living and that meets our needs and allows us to enjoy being indigenous people. We go on to looking at a time of migration where our Pueblo nations, started looking for other places to settle near the water, near, you see a lot of the Pueblo settlements along the Rio Grande. And then, so it brings us to this point of time of Spanish colonization. In the early 1500s, here in New Mexico, on the East Coast, unfortunately, our indigenous relatives felt the hardship and the genocide of British colonizers. Over here in New Mexico, we felt the force of Spanish conquest. So here in 1540, we see Coronado, who was a Spanish conquistador who came through this territory and started colonizing and killing our ancestors. But that didn't mean that we didn't resist against their swords, against their iron. We fought in wars like the Tigre War, which is in Tiwa territory, so-called Albuquerque, who held a stronghold against the Spanish for 80 days. Literally like iron against like arrowheads and sticks and rocks. We've resisted 80 days. We go to like the Battle of Acoma, where our relatives fought against Oñate and his Inquisition. And it leads us to this very significant point in history, which is the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, which is where alliances of each pueblo came together to physically fight against the Spanish crown, and were successful in overtaking the Spanish crown. We had 12 years of peace. We ran the Spanish out of our territory. But unfortunately, we all know that colonization is a force. And so we go into the era of Spanish recolonizing in like the late 1600s to the mid 1800s, which is where we have the Mexican-American War, where the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was written, which is a treaty from the 1800s, which for some reason still holds its weight today. It also generated other acts of removal. So we look at the Indian Removal Act of 1830. We were on lands, we were occupying lands that the colonizers wanted. They wanted what we were stewarding. This idea of property was an idea that was cultivated by the colonizers, not us. We are just guests here. We are just people that are trying to live in reciprocity with the land, never to exploit it. We move on into this era of American colonization. So after Spanish recolonization, there is an act of American colonization westward. And we see this happening through the Homestead Act, which was Western expansion, trying to get people that were settled on the East Coast to come out this way. And then that's when you started seeing like the Department of the Interior being formed. A lot of people don't realize this, but the Department of the Interior came out of the Department of War. And the Department of War, they oversaw land and Indians. like land and Indians were something that were synonymous with each other, because it meant that if we removed indigenous peoples from these lands, then we could have the benefit to exploit the resources off of this land. But we need to move the natives out of the way. And so I want to like emphasize on this point here, because we are standing in front of the Bureau of Land Management, which is an entity that comes out of the Department of Interior. And as we know, and as we get further on into this fossil fuel extractive era, we'll see how entities like the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, have all managed our landscapes without the consultation or without the consent of indigenous people. So we move on in history as we enter a boarding school era. This is an era where the act to assimilate indigenous people was very heavy. That meant stealing our children from our villages, to cut their hair and to make them learn English, and to uphold white supremacy and be white and just forget about their indigeneity. We have like the Dawes Act, which is where they were like selling land parcels, native Indian land, stolen land, for further colonial development. Then we start getting into, in the early 1900s, which is, a point in time where New Mexico became a state of the United States of America. Other bureaus, like the Bureau of Reclamation, which has commodified and dammed a lot of our water resources here throughout the Southwest. We, and then this point in history right here, 1946, Bureau of Land Management. This agency isn't really that old, but they have a lot of control over how our lands are being managed. To move a little bit more forward, there's still this act of relocating and removing indigenous people, but in a less genocidal way. We have the Indian Relocation Act, where they literally were moving people that lived here in New Mexico to cities in California to further that assimilation. And it was only until 1975 that we were able to be recognized through federal acts. So the Indian Self-Determination Act and Indian Assistance Act was a way for them to allow us to exercise our self-determination and sovereignty, and also have autonomy over how we're going to educate our children throughout the future. Which leads us into this era, this fossil fuel extraction era. The first oil and gas well was developed in New Mexico and in the southern part of the state in 1921. So oil and gas in New Mexico was found in 1911 in like the Greater Chaco region, but the first oil well didn't come into play until 1921. So this is like a significant point in time where we start seeing the exploitation of not just oil and gas, but uranium. New Mexico was a huge productivity zone for uranium mining. We were part of this race to build the first atomic bomb, and even more so, we have the Trinity site where they tested the bomb on our lands, and all of that radiation and all of the other stuff that comes out of an atomic bomb is now poisoning that landscape as well. We have in 1968, the Nixon administration designated Navajo as an energy sacrifice zone. Navajo Nation as an energy sacrifice zone, which has now led us to 2021, and the Four Corners area has the biggest methane cloud that you can see from space. So these in time have proven that oil and gas and other extractive resources are being exploited and are now contributing to climate change. We want to mention the Jackpot mine in Laguna, which has affected a lot of our relatives in the Laguna Acoma area, which is an open mine uranium pit. And this isn't just a one-time occurrence. Open uranium pits are all over the state, and the radiation is continuing to be unmitigated, and thus giving the land just not a chance for regeneration. And so now we're here in 2021, where our relative of Laguna Pueblo has been nominated to be the Secretary of the Department of the Interior. So what does that mean for our future? If we don't give our lands and our waters a chance, then we may not have what we have now in the future. And that is something to consider, because even in just this short amount of time compared to the whole, like the existence of our world in itself, look at how much damage we have done. We've done so much damage in this short amount of time because we are upholding systems of colonialism that have been exploiting our cultural resources and exploiting the labor of the people of this land as well. And so we're here today to share this information and to remind the BLM and the Biden administration that we need to address colonialism and how it has affected the extractive fossil fuel economy up until this very point. And so if we don't do something about it now, what is that to say for generations on? We may not have places like Chaco to return to and to enjoy being indigenous if we allow the fossil fuel economy to dictate over how our lands and waters are managed in the future. And so that's why we're here today, to show our followers, to show our relatives, to show the BLM that this is just a part of the colonial history. This doesn't even compare to all of the other acts of assimilation and genocide and land exploitation and water exploitation. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but this is the best way for us to show you all what extractive colonialism looks like and what indigenous resistance has looked like up until this point. Because we are still here and we are not going anywhere, and we will continue to fight and we will continue to steward to protect these landscapes and protect our waters from, again, this extractive industry. And so I just want to maybe close it out by just, demanding that we end this fossil fuel extractive era, that we end extractive colonialism, that the Biden administration and DOI, the Department of the Interior, address issues of tribal sovereignty and self-determination, address the climate crisis, and also address that indigenous resistance has been going on since first contact, and that our existence as indigenous people is equally as important as it is for capitalist gain from exploiting cultural resources and exploiting the land. And so I just want to say again, thank you to everybody that has supported the Greater Chaco Coalition, that has supported Pueblo Action Alliance, and all of the other indigenous resistance organizations across New Mexico who have been addressing colonialism in terms of violence on the land and violence on the people. And with that, we're gonna end our live stream here. Or wait, are we gonna end the live stream, or are we gonna do letters? Okay. We're gonna wrap up our history lesson, our colonial history lesson of New Mexico. So Herkim, Shem, thank you for put pressure on the new administration, put pressure on any other land bureau or land management bureaus or other types of systems of governments that have upheld colonialism up until this point.